Well, day after hitting pause on its season, the NHL is saying no to the Beijing Olympics. The Hockey League saying its players will not be allowed to take part in the Winter Games, in part to try and curb the spread of the Omicron variant. Let's bring in Yahoo Finance's Josh Schafer, who's covering the story for us. And Josh, I guess part of the reason here is that because they've now had to pause the season, they have to make up some games. And the thinking is they could do that during the Olympics.
Right. They have a 2-week period there. It's about 16 days where the NHL could maybe slot in some of those games. And that's pretty much what NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman said in his statement today. He called it, quote, no longer feasible. And then he said, we certainly acknowledge and appreciate the efforts made by the International Olympic Committee, the International Ice Hockey Federation, and the Beijing Organizing Committee to host NHL players. But current circumstances have made it impossible for us to proceed despite everyone's best efforts. We look forward to Olympic participation in 2026. So basically what the commissioner is saying here is they want NHL players to be able to participate in the Olympics. This is not like 2018 where they kind of didn't want the players to go over there and it was more of a scheduling issue. They had the time set up for the players to be over there February 4th and play in this tournament. But the NHL is going through a serious COVID spike right now. Over 15% of players have been added to the COVID-19 list across the league. They've already postponed 50 games. They're going to have to find a way to play 50 games at a later date. And they're currently on pause through December 25th. And then this Sunday on December 26th, they're going to come at a pause, but they're going to have negative tests for players to return to action. So it's really kind of fully up in the air. And then you add in the final total variable here, which is the NHL has teams in Canada and the US. How's that going to continue to progress over the next couple months? They've already had American players go over to Canada and get stuck and have to quarantine in a hotel for a week and not be able to come back with their team. Is that something we're going to see moving forward? If so, the NHL is in big trouble. They already lost billions during the pandemic, and it seems like it might be getting worse.
Josh, in some ways, this is a story that we have seen play out before. 2018, the players were not allowed to take part in the Pyeongchang Olympics at the time. How big of a blow is it for the Olympics, and particularly Beijing, at a time when these games have been seen is quite controversial?
Yeah, it hurts. There are not a lot of sports that normally have pro players that fans recognize internationally that play in the Olympics. That's not always the case, right? And the NHL is normally one of those sports. It has been over the past couple of years and since for decades now. It wasn't in 2018, and we saw in 2018 the viewership dip for NBC. Now you could maybe attribute that to Team USA not being as good that year in men's hockey, and maybe that's why the viewership dipped, but it dipped by a couple million. And I think that has to do with people not recognizing the faces that they see playing and those names that they're normally rooting for in the National Hockey League. Perhaps maybe the narrative can shift and people will be excited to root for the amateur players that are going to replace the NHL players over there. If you remember back in 1980 when people were excited about the Olympics, all those players, when the USA beat Russia or the Soviet Union, were college players. And it is fun to root for younger players and kind of an upstart story. So I think that's what the Olympics is going to have to hope for here, is people get excited to see new faces and young stars that can emerge.
Yeah, hard to believe we're just, less than 2 months out from the Beijing Olympics. I feel like we just watched the Tokyo Olympics, but a lot of attention going to be placed on Beijing. Josh, thanks so much for that.